The Dodgers had just finished a 3-1 victory over the Milwaukee Brewers. For Shohei Ohtani, it wasn't exactly a spectacular night at the plate. He had been quiet offensively, and before the game he had already thrown more than 30 pitches during his bullpen work. Most players would have headed straight toward the clubhouse. Ohtani didn't. Instead, he walked through the corridors of Dodger Stadium carrying a large box. And he wasn't heading toward the media. He wasn't looking for attention. He was heading toward Clayton Kershaw's family. When Kershaw saw Ohtani approaching, he immediately noticed the box. What was inside? Ohtani placed it in front of Kershaw's children and opened the lid. Inside were traditional Japanese kimonos and yukata. The children immediately became excited. They pulled the clothing from the box, unfolded the colorful fabric, and began asking Ohtani if they could put them on. But Kershaw was confused. Then his memory suddenly came back. A long time earlier, Ohtani had apparently promised Kershaw's children that he would bring them traditional Japanese clothing. It had been a casual promise. So casual that even Kershaw had forgotten about it. Apparently, the children had forgotten too. But Ohtani hadn't. Kershaw looked at him and asked, "You still remembered that?" Ohtani simply smiled. Then came the answer that left Kershaw stunned. "I promised the kids." No dramatic explanation. No speech. Just 4 simple words. But that wasn't the end. Ohtani didn't simply hand over the box and walk away. He sat down with the children and personally helped them put on the traditional clothing. He adjusted the sleeves, fixed the collars, made sure everything fit properly. The children laughed, ran around, and proudly showed their new outfits to their family. And Kershaw stood there watching, because he was beginning to understand that this wasn't really about the clothes. It was about something much bigger. Ohtani had remembered a promise that nobody else even remembered anymore. And that raised an extraordinary question. Why would a superstar with one of the busiest schedules in baseball remember something this small? The answer would reveal something about Ohtani's character that statistics could never explain. Kershaw was still trying to process what had just happened. His children were running around the hallway, excitedly showing their new Japanese outfits to the rest of the family. But Kershaw couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Ohtani had remembered. Not because anyone reminded him. Not because the children had asked for the gifts again. And certainly not because cameras were waiting. In fact, according to the story, practically everyone involved had forgotten about the original promise. Kershaw eventually looked at Ohtani and joked that his own children didn't even remember the promise anymore. That made Ohtani smile. He looked toward the children, then back at Kershaw. And that's when he delivered the line that completely changed the meaning of the moment. "That's okay, the person who made the promise only needs to remember." Kershaw reportedly had no immediate response. Think about how unusual that statement is. Most promises survive because somebody keeps reminding us. A child asks, "Dad, when are you going to do it?" A friend says, "You promised me." A family member brings it up again. Eventually, the promise gets fulfilled because someone is waiting for it. But this situation was completely different. Nobody was waiting. The children had moved on. Kershaw had forgotten. The baseball season had continued. Ohtani had an enormous schedule of his own. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, that promise was still there. And when he finally had the opportunity to fulfill it, he did. That is what makes the story so powerful. Ohtani didn't need the moment. He didn't need the recognition. He didn't need anyone to know that he had kept his word. He simply remembered something he had said and decided that his word still mattered. And there was another reason the moment was particularly remarkable. Earlier that same day, Ohtani had already gone through his own demanding routine. He had completed more than 30 pitches during his bullpen work before the game. Then he had to prepare to play. There was batting practice, pre-game preparation, the actual game, and all the physical and mental demands that come with being Shohei Ohtani. After the Dodgers finally secured the 3-1 victory, he could have easily gone straight into recovery mode. Instead, he took the time to walk through the stadium carrying a box that contained something he had promised 2 children long ago. That's not something that appears in a box score. It doesn't show up in his batting average. It doesn't increase his home run total. But moments like this help explain why teammates and people around Ohtani often describe him as someone who pays attention to the small details. And for Kershaw, the experience must have felt particularly meaningful. Kershaw has spent years around elite athletes. He understands better than most people what fame does to a person. Once you're a superstar, almost everything you do can become part of the public conversation. Every pitch, every at-bat, every interview, every mistake, every celebration. But Ohtani's most meaningful moment that night wasn't something he did in front of thousands of fans. It happened quietly in a hallway. There was no scoreboard, no announcer, no stadium celebration. Just Ohtani, Kershaw, and a couple of children holding traditional Japanese clothing. And then came the moment that made the children even happier. Ohtani didn't simply give them the gifts and leave. He sat down beside them. He helped them figure out how to wear the clothing properly. He adjusted the fabric. He made sure the sleeves weren't twisted. And when the children finally put everything on, their excitement became impossible to hide. They immediately wanted to show everyone. They ran off toward their siblings, laughing and pointing at their new outfits. Ohtani simply watched them with a smile. Kershaw watched too. And for a few seconds, the superstar pitcher and the biggest star in baseball weren't thinking about era, home runs, or championships. They were simply watching their children enjoy a special moment. But there was an even deeper lesson hidden inside what had happened. A promise doesn't become meaningful because someone remembers it. It becomes meaningful because someone keeps it even when nobody remembers it anymore. And that's exactly what Ohtani had done. He had made a promise. Time passed. Everyone forgot. But Ohtani remembered. And when the opportunity finally came, he quietly fulfilled it. No announcement. No publicity. No expectation of praise. Just a promise kept. And perhaps that is why Kershaw was left more impressed by Ohtani's character than by anything he had done on the baseball field that night. Because baseball greatness can be measured. Home runs can be counted. Wins can be recorded. Championships can be displayed. But character is revealed in the moments when nobody is watching. And Ohtani had just shown Kershaw exactly that. There was something almost poetic about the timing. The Dodgers had just won 3-1 over Milwaukee. The stadium was beginning to empty. Players were heading toward the clubhouse. The cameras were moving toward the next story. But away from the noise, Shohei Ohtani was creating a memory that had nothing to do with baseball. And perhaps that is exactly why the moment mattered so much. Because Ohtani didn't need to do it. Nobody was waiting for the gift. Nobody was reminding him. Nobody would have criticized him if he had forgotten. Yet he remembered. And that tells us something important about the way Ohtani approaches relationships. For years, people have focused on his extraordinary baseball abilities. The home runs, the pitching, the speed, the unbelievable workload, the statistics that seem almost impossible. But moments like this reveal another side of Ohtani. He pays attention. He remembers small conversations. He remembers promises. And when he gives someone his word, apparently he doesn't consider that promise expired simply because time has passed. For Clayton Kershaw, that probably meant more than the actual gift. Kershaw has shared a clubhouse with some of the biggest names in baseball. He knows what superstar behavior looks like. He knows that fame can sometimes create distance between athletes and ordinary people. But Ohtani did the opposite. He used his time and his position to make two children feel special. And there was no complicated gesture involved. There was just a box. Inside were Japanese kimonos and yukata. And behind them was a promise that had survived years of baseball games, travel, injuries, pressure, and an incredibly demanding schedule. The children may not remember exactly when Ohtani first made that promise. They may not even have remembered that it existed. But they will almost certainly remember the day the promise finally arrived. They'll remember opening the box. They'll remember putting on the clothes. They'll remember running around the stadium showing their family. And most importantly, they'll remember who kept the promise. That's the kind of memory that lasts. And it also explains why Ohtani's response to Kershaw was so powerful. When Kershaw pointed out that the children didn't even remember the promise, Ohtani didn't become embarrassed. He didn't say, "I guess I forgot too." Instead, he essentially said that it didn't matter. The person who made the promise remembered. That sentence captures an important idea about trust. A promise isn't only about the person receiving it. It's also about the person making it. If you say you're going to do something, the responsibility doesn't disappear just because the other person stops asking. That's what made Ohtani's gesture different from an ordinary celebrity gift. A celebrity can give someone something impressive in front of cameras. People will applaud. The story gets shared. Everyone remembers. But keeping a promise that everyone else has forgotten, that's different. There is no reward for that. Only the satisfaction of knowing you did what you said you would do. And that's perhaps the most revealing part of this entire story. Ohtani didn't turn the moment into a publicity event. He didn't make a speech. He didn't call attention to himself. He simply delivered the gift and spent time with the children. The gesture happened almost naturally. And that makes it feel much more genuine. For the Dodgers, moments like this can also mean something beyond one family. A baseball clubhouse isn't built only through wins. It's built through relationships. Players spend enormous amounts of time together. They travel together. They struggle together. They celebrate together. And eventually, their families become part of that environment too. When a superstar like Ohtani makes an effort to connect with a teammate's family, it strengthens those relationships away from the field. That's important. Because when October arrives and the pressure becomes enormous, trust matters. Players need to believe in one another. They need to know that their teammates care about more than statistics. And sometimes, that trust is built through tiny moments that never appear on television. A gift for someone's children. A joke in the clubhouse. A conversation after a difficult game. A promise remembered years later. Those moments become the foundation of a team. And perhaps that's why this story feels bigger than the kimonos themselves. The real gift wasn't the clothing. The real gift was the memory. Kershaw's children now have something that connects them directly to Ohtani and to this period of their family's life. Years from now, those children might not remember the exact score of the Dodgers' victory over Milwaukee. They probably won't remember how many pitches Ohtani threw that afternoon. They certainly won't remember his batting line from that particular game. But they may remember something much simpler. They may remember a Japanese superstar walking toward them with a box. They may remember opening it. They may remember Ohtani helping them put on the clothes. And they may remember their father standing there, realizing that Ohtani had kept a promise nobody else remembered. That's the kind of story people tell years later. And ultimately, that's what makes Shohei Ohtani so fascinating. His greatness isn't limited to what happens between the lines. Yes, he can change a baseball game with one swing. Yes, he can dominate from the mound. Yes, he can create moments that millions of fans remember. But sometimes the most revealing moments happen after the game is over. In a quiet hallway. Away from the cameras. With no crowd cheering. That's where character becomes visible. And on this night, Ohtani showed exactly what kind of person he wanted to be. A superstar who remembers. A teammate who cares. And most importantly, a person who keeps his word. Because everyone can make a promise. But when everyone else has forgotten, the person who still remembers is the one who proves what that promise really meant.